Well, hello, everyone. We are glad you're here with us at Bay Area Community Church, wherever you're joining us from. My name's Aaron. I'm one of our pastors, and we are always excited to be together. Even on a holiday weekend, there's a lot of reasons to come to church because you get extra points with Jesus, and you always get the JV preacher. So it's kind of like it balances out in the end. So we're going to jump in this morning, and the question I want to ask you is, what would you pay for that? What would you pay for that? That's a game that my wife and I will sometimes play. If I'm, doom scrolling on Amazon and you see some ridiculous gadget, it's like, hey, babe, what would you be willing to pay for that? For instance, what would you be willing to pay for an alarm clock that when it goes off, it runs away from you if you try to hit snooze? If you hit snooze, it's just like the wheels start going, it runs across the room. So the question is, how much would you be willing to pay for that? And think about it for a minute. How much would you be willing to pay for a device that might help you keep your job, And the answer is, in this case, would you be willing to pay $28? That's how much one of these costs. How many of you are like, sounds like a deal. I'm already on Amazon. Go ahead. I can send you the link. And if you use the link in the description, I get a small proceed from that. No, but look, if you think like 20, let's go, I'm going to buy one. Well, then that's a steal. For some of you who are like, absolutely not. I rise with the sun. And then like, okay, but you guys are different. But anyway, sometimes Lauren thinks something is worth more than the listed price, sometimes less. But the point is, value can be tricky and very subjective, right? For instance, what would you pay for a roll of toilet paper? $800. That's a lot. What would you pay in March of 2020 for a roll of toilet paper, right? $800 is actually the correct number there. But anyway, right, it's tricky. Or here's another example. What would you pay for a pacifier? Some of you like, nothing, or like dime a dozen pacifiers are easy to get. I wouldn't pay much for them. But what if I told you that these are glow-in-the-dark pacifiers? Now we're talking like, I'm serious. My wife and I when we discovered these 2 years ago with our youngest, it was like I will spend a year's worth of coffee money on buying a truckload of those. And we just like dumped the entire thing into the crib, like, find it now, kid. But anyway, so we have like 1,000 of these, and then we like had a ceremonial burning of all of them. So I had to buy more to illustrate that here today. But the point is that, look, value can be very subjective and very tricky. What makes something valuable in the first place? There's a number of ways that I think we can determine value, and because I am who I am, I put together a little bit of a chart to help us answer the question, what makes something valuable? Well, there's a few things. Again, it could be, first of all, what it's made of, right? The materials could make it valuable. For instance, gold is valuable just straight up because of what it is. So we've determined gold is valuable, so anything you make out of gold, it's going to have value because of the materials. There's also the question of how well it's made, the quality of the item. Right? A custom, handmade, solid wood dining table, that's going to be worth more than like the one you get from IKEA. Right? Those are going to be different. Rule of thumb, if you can put a piece of furniture together inside of your home with an Allen wrench, probably not super high quality, right? That's going to affect the price, although it does feel like IKEA is getting more expensive. Am I right? So I don't know what's going on there. But there's the quality. There's also how many of something there are. There's the rarity of an item. If there's not a lot of something, of course, it becomes more valuable. So whether it's a Birkin bag, or whether it's a limited edition Lego set, or it's a slot at the United States Naval Academy, right? Or whether it's trying to get a pickleball court at Truxton on a Saturday, like good luck. Or whether it's just trying to get tickets to see the Savannah Bananas. Like, if something is rare, it becomes more valuable, right? Supply and demand. That's how economics works, I've been told. But there's also the question of what it can do, the capabilities of the item. This is where a can opener really shines. It doesn't have to be made of gold. Maybe you have one made of gold, whatever. But it doesn't have to be made of, it's valuable because it's about the only thing that can do what a can opener can do. So that gives it value. There's also, of course, our attachment to the item. There's the connection. And that's where, for instance, this guy becomes very valuable. This is Ho-Ho. This is our youngest son's favorite bear, and we had to bring him late to church so that he was still sleeping with it when I left. We had to steal it from him after he awoke. This is Ho-Ho, and he is very valuable. Don't ask why he's Ho-Ho. I don't know, okay? They're children. But he's very valuable to our family. It's not because of what he's made of. He can't do anything. There's no, cool stuff inside, just a stuffed animal. But it's very valuable to our family. If I received a phone call and someone asked for ransom money because they had stolen Ho-Ho, I would respond, I have a very specific set of skills. No, I would say, Name your price. I will pay it because my family needs ho-ho. We will have no peace with Callan if we don't have ho-ho. He's valuable because of our attachment to him. But then, of course, the last category would be who made it or the maker of the item. This is sort of the trump card of every category, because if the right person made something, then it doesn't really matter what it is. It can have incredible value. If you're a guitar person, if you're a musician in this area, if the headstock of your guitar says PRS on it, it's valuable. And if you don't know what that is, shame on you and Google it, okay? Because you need to know about that company here. Or, for instance, if there's a pair of jeans and it has the right designer label on it, well, then who made it makes it valuable. Even if it looks identical to the knockoff, doesn't matter. If who made it will change the value. What's my point? The chart here is just supposed to show that there's a lot of ways that something can become valuable, and the more boxes that you check, the more likely something is to be valuable. And what in the world does that have to do with what we're talking about today? Well, we live in a world where we all are getting confused about the value of certain items. Because to me, it feels like the value of certain things is changing constantly. I'm old enough to remember when the brand Stanley only made one thing, and it was the thermos that your grandfather brought fishing. It's the only thing they made. And now these days, the company's values skyrocketed because they make 1 million different kinds of water bottles. I don't know when that happened. The selection you're seeing there is just the ones in the Lost and Found at the Annapolis campus, okay? It's unbelievable. They have all these different things. Their value has increased. Okay? Value is a ever-changing and strange standard. And that might be fun, right? It might be kind of cute when we're talking about water bottles or jeans. But we are asking these questions culturally about much more substantive things than just fashion or knickknacks. We are actively in a conversation as a culture about what is it worth to us? What is it worth to us to have peace in the Middle East? Right? What's it worth to us to have peace in Eastern Europe? What are we willing to pay? What's it worth to us to ensure safety in our streets or justice in our courts? How much privacy online are we willing to forego in order to protect our children from predators? How far are we willing to go? How much are we willing to pay to protect free speech or to ensure that students aren't harassed on a campus or to maintain our borders or to ensure due process of law? How much will we pay to prevent or to slow down climate change or to save an endangered species? Or to give another example, as Rachel Denhollander put it in her provocatively titled book about the survivors of Larry Nassar's abuse at USA Gymnastics and Michigan State, she asked the question, what is a girl worth? What's a girl worth? And that's a good question. What is a human worth? Does it depend? Does it depend on where they live or what religion they adhere to? Does it depend on how they vote? All of life involves trade-offs, right? To get what we want, we have to give up what we value less. So what is it that makes a human being valuable? What are we willing to give up to name that price? Is it enough for a human to just have a pulse, or do they have to bring something to the table? What makes a human being valuable? This morning, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 1 to search for an answer to that vital question. I'd encourage you to join me there in your copy of the scriptures, Genesis chapter 1. And I have 3 goals this morning. The 3 goals are this. First of all, to show that anything God makes is valuable. Anything God makes is valuable. Second of all, to show that humans are built different. Humans are built different. And then third of all, suggest what that must mean for us today. Okay, those are my 3 goals. Show that anything God makes is valuable, show that humans are built different, and suggest what that means for us today. Okay, I hope by the end of our time that I can make the case that every person, and that means you, every person is infinitely valuable and worthy to be treated as such. Okay, let's jump in. We'll start by exploring that first goal, proving that anything God makes is valuable. This comes from the very start of the story, which I've recorded for us in Genesis chapter 1. Here's what it says in verse 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now look, this morning is not the time to debate and to discuss the infinite controversy that surrounds the question of the origin of our universe, about how long the process might have taken. You likely bring some skepticism or doubts or questions to this issue. And honestly, I think you should lean into those doubts and questions and skepticism. Okay, the question, where did this all come from? That is absolutely vital to ask. And it doesn't need to be explored like in the dark corners of the internet or like with some class your freshman year of college away from the prying eyes of your pastor. No, that's not how you have to do that. It's a vital question, and I believe that the Christian worldview, the scriptures, scientific inquiry, they can be brought into alignment. So I encourage you to explore that. We're not scared of that question. But for our purposes today, I want to give you what I believe to be the simplest biblical answer to that question that sort of avoids most of the controversy, okay? I just want to say the simple answer that will function as the basis for the rest of our conversation today. Okay? Simple, biblical, hopefully non-controversial here. Here's what I think the scriptures are claiming. God himself is personally responsible for the creation of our universe out of nothing. Okay, we could talk a lot more about timing and mechanism and all that, but here's what we want to know. God himself is personally responsible for the creation of our universe out of nothing. Okay? That, I believe, is the clear testimony of the scriptures. It was nothing, and then he made it something. And that fact alone has massive implications for this conversation. Okay, this means that God is the unmoved mover, or the first cause. And the exploration of our value, the purpose of our existence as humanity, it has to begin with this central truth that God created and thus has ownership rights over the entire universe. Like every speck of every corner, he made it, he owns it. And Genesis 1 goes on to simply give a description or a depiction of that creation process. First of all, we see that he filled the world with light. It says, and God said in verse 3, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. Now, I want you to note something here that's going to be a pattern. The pattern is this, that a thing is spoken into existence, and then God will render judgment on that thing, the essence of the thing that he has just made. He makes it and then evaluates it. And each time he evaluates it to be good. And that's really important. Okay, the maker calls it good. Not good like good, better, best. Good as in perfect. Everything gets a value judgment and it's rendered by the creator, coming back identically each time. This is exactly as I intend it to be. So that's day one, there's light. Day two, the sky is created. A separating occurs between the earth and the rest of the expanse. On day three, the trend continues. The ground and the seas are separated. God calls that division good, and he's on a roll that day, so he makes some more creation on day three. He also makes plants and vegetation. Verse 12, it says, the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its own kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. We're seeing it there, right? It's called good. What's day four about? Well, God had just covered the ground with vegetation, so now it's time to cover the sky with something beautiful as well. He creates the sun, moon, and stars to dominate the sky. And guess what he renders them, what he labels them? Verse 17, God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. He calls them good. Oh, what about 5? Day 5 is next. I have a feeling you're starting to catch the drift. What's happening here? In this case, the Lord creates water-based animals and air-based animals. Some people call air-based animals birds, but I thought it would seem fancy if I called them air-based animals. I'm hoping that worked. So let's continue here, verse 21. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. You get to the point when you're reading this that it's almost hypnotic, right? There's a beat to it of repeated patterns and rhythm and rhyme and themes. And by the time we get to day 6, it sort of feels like a Mad Lib, like we could fill in the blanks because we know what's coming. You're ready to rock. If you were to guess what happens on day 6 at the start of it, you'd probably be right. God said, verse 24, and God said, let us. verse 24, and God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, same as every other day, just different creation, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and livestock according to their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Day 6, at this point, just seems like another normal day in like the craziest week ever, right? And if we were to stop it right there, I think we've accomplished the first goal that I set out to accomplish. The first goal was, remember, to prove that everything God makes is valuable. And what have we seen so far? What we've seen is that if you draw a circle and put inside of it everything that God made, it would literally encompass everything that exists. And our chart from earlier indicated that the most bulletproof way to know if something is valuable is if it was made by someone who was significant in some way. And so the claim of Genesis 1 that we've seen so far is that everything that exists was made by a perfect, supreme, one-of-a-kind, self-existent entity who is the most beautiful, creative being in the universe. What that has to mean is that everything God has made is valuable. I think that has huge implications for how we view the world. If everything God made is valuable, then that has to impact how we treat the things that He has made, right? If something is valuable, you're not supposed to treat it with disdain or disrespect. We have to care about the things God has made. Things like the environment, or endangered species, or our oceans, or our natural resources, and even as much as it pains me to say it, cats. It's the calling of discipleship, you know? It's rough. We cannot treat with disdain anything that God made good. But if you're familiar with the story of creation, you know that this isn't the end of what happens on day 6. If we think about our goals, hopefully we just accomplished number 1 to show that everything God makes is valuable. But now it's time to turn to goal number 2. We need to see how humans are built different. By the way, if you are thinking like, isn't that supposed to be differently? Isn't that supposed to be an adverb? Yes, it is. It's a phrase that the kids are saying is built different, so I said it that way, but I know it's supposed to have an ly. That was from my mother. Okay. If everything God creates is valuable, because He's the God of the universe, then why is humanity any different? Any different than a carrot or a cactus or a cat? And that's not a silly question. It's actually a vital one. Because there are a lot of people in our world today who have asked this question and gotten it wrong. And their lives and their actions have created terrible consequences for the rest of humanity. If you don't believe me, please study the wars of the 20th century, and I think we'll be in agreement about what happens when we have bad answers to fundamental questions. What is it that makes humanity valuable over and above anything else? Well, that comes into focus when we read about how humanity is made, starting in verse 26. Humans are the last thing to be created, and you get the sense that God has saved the best for last. Verse 26, it says this, Then God said, let us make man in our own image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. This is such a game-changing moment, and there's so much to see in this verse. First of all, notice that instead of saying, to start off the creation quote, it doesn't start, let there be, which is how He's created everything else. Now He says, not let there be, but let us make. Let us make. This is a much more personal way to discuss something coming into existence. He's choosing to fashion it, to form it, rather than just causing it to exist. Okay, so the description of the process is different for humanity, but also what is being made is clearly in a totally different league. The Lord says, let us make mankind in our own image, in our own likeness. We're going to define what image and likeness means later on, but whatever it means, it apparently comes with some huge responsibilities. Verse 26 says, and let them have dominion over like everything ever. And then verse 28 says, God blessed them, said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing on the earth. They've been given huge responsibility. Humanity is called to multiply and use this paradise planet that He's made as the perfect habitat for living and working and playing and enjoying. Every single thing on the planet was available for their use and enjoyment. That's an unbelievable job description. And what we get in verse 27 is a poetic sort of summarization of the role and the importance of these new things called humans. Verse 27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." This is incredible. Okay, you may not realize how profound this is, but I just want you to know that this view of humanity, that humanity is something special, created by God with a purpose, with an entirely unique value, that might seem to you to be intuitive or obvious or sort of the bedrock of everything else we know about the world, but that has not been at all obvious for most people, for most of human history. And when that fact is not fundamentally understood, it is always a disaster for humans downstream. Yet from the opening chapter of the Bible, God graciously reveals to everyone who will listen that humanity is built different. We're valuable, but in a way that is unique when compared with the rest of creation. Let's look back at the chart. Okay, let me show you what I mean. What makes something valuable? Well, we said, first of all, it could be the materials, but in the case of humanity, our materials are dust. We are made from the dust, and that doesn't really set us apart. God creates everything else actually from nothing, which I think is arguably cooler than making something from dust. So we don't get anywhere on the materials. But then what about the second line? What about the quality? Well, the quality is declared later to be very good, but that's actually the same because humans and all of the rest of creation are declared to be very good. So we're still not any different from raccoons at this point. But when we get to rarity, things change because here, humanity, we see, is one of a kind. They have a unique calling to have dominion over the planet. And then there's also our capabilities that we're meant to represent and reflect God. That's something that the rest of the animal kingdom, the rest of the plant kingdom, they can't do that. But we have a responsibility to rule and to represent God, to reflect his character. Sharks, we're not given that responsibility. Maple trees, we're not given that responsibility. The sun, which so many other religions worship, it didn't have that responsibility. Humans have the capability to reflect and represent God. That sets us apart. And then, of course, there's also the idea of connection. And this is where it really seals the deal. Everything else in creation just comes into existence. No personal touch, no personal reflection on the part of God. It's just poof and done. But with humanity, as you read this account, you can almost see the smile on God's face as he personally fashions humanity, doing so in his image. This is the crescendo of a building story, and there's a uniqueness to the creation of humans. Clearly, humans are special to God in a way that is different. And of course, the most important factor in determining value is who made it. And in this case, we are made by God himself, but really just like the rest of creation and animal kingdom, we all came from God. However, we'll see in a second that our Maker gave us something that is beautiful and totally unparalleled. We're going to come back to that idea in just a moment, because I think it's important that we pause and clarify one thing from that chart. That chart mentions our capability as humans. But as I'm sure you are aware, not every human has the same capabilities. Right? Some humans can dunk. Some humans can ace a calculus test. Some of us can do neither. Right? But it's more profound than that. Think of a person, of course, with a mental or a physical disability. A person who's aging and losing capabilities. A preborn person who has yet to exhibit any capabilities, had a chance to. Their capabilities are different. But does that lack of capability impact their value? Does the inability to contribute in the same way change how they should be rated in terms of their worth? That might seem a little bit like a harsh way to say it, but it actually is an open question in our culture. I would suggest that not everyone is honest enough to frame it in those terms or to say it out loud, but the question is asked and answered in a lot of subtle ways every day. I personally would argue that one of the main reasons that abortion remains an openly celebrated practice in our culture is because the answer to the question, is a person valuable no matter how much they can contribute, that question is answered differently by our culture than by the Scriptures. This is one of the reasons, for instance, I would suggest that euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide or medical assistance in dying, the reason that that's on the rise. There are a number of states in the U.S. that have legalized it. Thankfully, Maryland is not one of them, although it was a narrow miss in this last session. But a major article just appeared in The Atlantic a couple of weeks ago with this title, "Canada is Killing Itself. The country gave its citizens the right to die, and doctors are struggling to keep up with demand." As of 2 years ago in Quebec, physician-assisted suicide accounts for 7% of all deaths. Why would this be? How could this be? Well, it's because of a worldview that asserts that when you're no longer able to contribute as you did before or live life on your own terms, perhaps it's better that you just be done. So what's the answer? How do we avoid that disastrously low view of the value of a human? Well, even with all that we've seen in Genesis so far, we haven't yet answered the question, what makes humanity uniquely different? How are we different from the rest of creation? The answer can't be, as we've said, it can't be who made us or who owns us, because that applies to all of creation is owned by God. All of it's valuable. It would be kind of like how every single object, seemingly, that somebody like Abraham Lincoln, every single thing that he ever touched or owned or looked at more than once is encased in glass somewhere in a museum, right? Every pen, every book, every hat, every razor blade that he didn't seem to use much, every random envelope, right? It's all valuable because of who owned it, right? And that same effect is true for all of creation. Everything God made is valuable. And that could lead us to believe that humans and horses are equally valuable, right? But if the owner of an object endows that object with something special or unique, well, then its value can skyrocket. An already valuable thing can become more valuable, right? Every scrap of paper we have that belonged to Abraham Lincoln is valuable. But if he scribbled the words of the Gettysburg Address on the back of one of those envelopes, now that piece of paper is not just valuable, it's priceless. Why? Because its already significant owner endowed the object that was once valuable with something significant and made it priceless. Now, history buffs in the room are like, that's an urban legend. He didn't really do that. He didn't write the Gettysburg Address on the back of it. I know, okay. History professors, my friend, Dr. Hemmler, I acknowledge you, okay? I know he didn't really do that. I'm trying to make a point. Because this is what happened with humanity. It's what God put in us, what God put on us that makes us different. We alone, in all of creation, have something called the image of God. The image of God. In Latin, it's the Imago Dei, the image of God. And what is the image of God? What does that mean? Well, in some ways, the image of God is incredibly esoteric and difficult to describe. And in other ways, it is absolutely obvious. It's obvious. It's as gut-level obvious, right, as comparing a toddler and a tuna. Right? They might smell the same sometimes, but you can tell they're different, and one of them is more valuable, right? Clearly more special. The image of God at least means that we represent God by being uniquely like God in all of the rest of creation. We have a lot of features that nothing else has. For instance, we've got things like our intellect, our will, our desires, the full range of emotions. We have inherent relational needs that go way beyond just biology or instinct or tribalness. We are clearly different than the rest of creation. In fact, God would go on to tell his people, Israel, that they were never to construct an image or an idol of him, their God. And that's strange because most religions, especially at the time, would depict their deities in little statues or idols or images. But the Creator God expressly forbid his people from doing that. Why? At least one of the reasons is because he already has an image. He already has a representative. He already made something meant to express what he is like in the world. And it's us. It's us. We are those little images, walking, talking, eating, breathing, sleeping, worshiping, serving, pictures of who God is and what he's like. And that's stunning. It's truly stunning. And maybe you feel like this morning, like you stumbled into like a random philosophy lecture and you were like, I was willing to go to church on a holiday weekend. What are we doing right now? Right? But let me tell you, I'm convinced this is one of the most important practical truths that you could ever hear. You are made in the image of God. Unique in all of creation. You were given the privilege of representing in physical form the creator of the universe by virtue of merely existing on the planet that he made for you. And if that's true, then humanity is the most valuable thing that has ever existed. Humanity is the most valuable thing that has ever existed. And if that's true, it includes you. It includes you. All of us. You are the most valuable thing to have ever come to exist. And I want to spell this out for us because I think so much hurt and destruction in our world has come from people not knowing this truth or distorting it in some way. Okay, so let me make it as clear as I can. Your value as a human is first of all inherent. Your value is inherent, meaning you count. Your value is inherent. You are valuable simply because you are. You exist. Existence is the only criteria for value as a human. There is no modification necessary. And this, again, has massive implications for our relationships, for our lives, for our own self-worth. For example, first of all, it means if we believe that, it should prevent us from ever looking down on someone else. Why? Well, because they're just as human as you are. They shouldn't be treated worse just because of this or that factor that bothers you about them. They have no less claim on the image of God than you do, so you can't look down on anybody. But it also means, secondarily, that this would prevent us from ever idolizing somebody in an unhealthy way. Why? Because they're just a human. They're human just like you. And it's so easy for us to come to believe that there are certain types of people who, because of their position or accomplishments, that they're worthy of different kinds of treatment or special privileges and obligations. But you've never met a person who has more of the image of God than you do. And I'm not saying you can't respect people, of course, or that you can't elevate them as appropriate, but no human should ever be elevated to the point that we do on a regular basis. Only God deserves our worship. Your value is inherent. You count, but it is also unchanging. In other words, you can count on it. You count and you can count on it. Your value does not fluctuate like the tides or like the markets. It's unchanging. It's fixed. There's a tempting lie that I think we have to reject when it comes to value. The tempting lie is that I will become more valuable if I'm just able to accomplish more, become more beautiful, get married, have kids, save more for retirement, do better in school, make a more positive contribution in the world, whatever it is, right? That idea is tempting, but it's a lie. You don't get more valuable ever. Your value is an unchanging, fixed fact about you. And then, of course, there's a flip side of this lie, and that's our tendency to believe that we have somehow done something that has cheapened our value, that has made us worthless in some way. This is also totally false. Yes, sin and other kinds of wrong behaviors, they are distorting, but it never in any way reduces our value before God. You are His special creation. You carry His image. Your value is unchanging. You can count on that. I don't know what you were told or what you've believed about how your behavior might have impacted your value, but it's a lie. Your value is inherent and unchanging, and finally, it is immeasurable. You count, you can count on it, and you can't count it. Your value is immeasurable. In the eyes of your Maker, you are not a mediocre accomplishment. You are not someone he tolerates. He doesn't technically love you while finding you like personally irritating, right? No, your Heavenly Father literally likes you. He likes you. You cannot calculate the degree to which your Creator finds you as His image bearer enjoyable, interesting, valuable, significant. We have to come to understand that your value, our value as humans, is inherent, unchanging, and immeasurable. And my friends, I wish we had all the time in the world that we could explore so many of the tentacles of where this truth reaches in our lives, the implications. Because I think that this foundational truth ought to change our view of humanity's purpose, how we should approach today's headlines, and so many more things. But I need us to just pause and embrace this truth, that no matter what purpose you fulfill or don't, no matter what things you do, no matter how wrong it goes, no matter how short of your potential you might fall, we're built different. And so you are inherently, unchangeably, immeasurably, unalterably valuable because of who made you and the fact that He made you in His image. I'm praying that this bedrock foundation can produce in us a security in our position as humans. It can transform the way we live. Because obviously, as I'm saying this, you might have noticed I'm making it very you-centric. It's about your value and about your worth. But that's not because I want to turn us all into a bunch of narcissists. No. It's because when we truly embrace this fact about our own inherent human dignity, we will inevitably and inexorably come to see that it is equally true of every single person around you. And that has to fundamentally change how we behave toward others. I'm saying these truths about you so that we can live by them in our interaction with others. Do you see how this could change things? Even our perspective about the people in our world who are our worst case scenario enemies. But I'm convinced that in order to be shaped by this radical truth when it comes to the value of others, we have to first accept it to be true about ourselves. And so I want us as a church family to live with a deep-seated security in our innate dignity in the midst of a world that wants to tell you that your value is going to come from a million different places, like your sexuality or your appearance or your intelligence or your athleticism or your gender identity or reading the Bible a bunch or managing your money well or being a good Christian or any other lie. I want us to have the assurance, bedrock assurance, that your value as a human comes from being human. And humans are made in the image of the Creator, and there's nothing more valuable than Him. That's who He says you are. Now, of course, as we close, one of the sad facts of the world that we live in is that all of us are distorting the image of God on a regular basis. If we're intended to image or to represent God, then I think we could agree we aren't always doing a great job of it. In fact, I think you would say that humanity is collectively royally messing it up on a regular basis. We're wildly sinful as we try to reflect God. So how does that work? Doesn't that diminish our value? The amazing thing is, no, it doesn't. It doesn't diminish our value in God's eyes one bit. And in fact, if you want evidence of how valuable He deems you to be, even in the midst of your broken condition, look no further than the cross of Jesus Christ. Paul said in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, how did God demonstrate His love for us? In that while we were still sinners, warping, twisting, and otherwise degrading His image that He has given to us, it is in that moment of our sin that Christ died for us. Infinitely valuable humanity. While we were still sinners, God paid the highest possible price to redeem us, to offer us a new way of living that would bring healing and peace to a world of brokenness. There is no greater value than humanity, and there's no greater evidence of humanity's value than the price God was willing to pay. If He had to answer the question, what would you pay for that? And the question was about humanity, God's immediate answer to us is, I'd be willing to pay with the life of my only son. If you ever question your value, look to the cross. While you were still sinners, while we were still sinners, Christ paid the ultimate price for us. And this morning we have a chance to remember the price that he paid by taking communion together. If you didn't grab those elements on your way in, please raise your hand. Our ushers will come around and make sure that you have these elements. Because what communion is the object lesson that Christ gave us. He said to remember him, to do it in remembrance of him. What are we remembering? We're remembering the price of our forgiveness. We're remembering the price he paid to demonstrate our value in his eyes. The price that love demanded from God. Jesus said he came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom, to pay the price. And communion is our chance together to remember that price paid. Let me pray for us, and then we'll take these elements together. Jesus, we are so humbled by these incredible truths. That you, the Word who was there in the beginning, without whom nothing was made that was made, you loved us enough to put on flesh, to dwell with us. You who are rich became poor, that through your humble poverty, we get to store our wealth in heaven with you. You paid that price. I pray that we would see it reflected in our view of ourselves, and that you would see it reflected in the way that we treat others for whom you died and that you made. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. So Jesus, after supper, on the night he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Let's take and eat in remembrance of him." And then after supper, he took the cup. He said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. When we drink it, we remember that we've been brought into the family of God. It's through his blood that we have the forgiveness of sins." Let's remember the price paid. Jesus, we lay our lives before you. We thank you for the price paid. We reflect on what it must mean, what your incredible love must be, that you are willing to pay for us, sinners as we are. You are willing to pay for us with your very life. And I thank you that you have left us here on this planet, not merely to represent who you are through our existence, but now as your children, we're able to represent the values of your kingdom lived out so that the rest of your creation can see. We eagerly look forward to the day that you come back and we will be able to see ourselves and you and each other in the way that you always intended. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thanks for being here this morning, being a part of Bay Area. Two things I want to say as you're heading out. If you're going to go to the West Lawn, you can grab your kids. There's a lot of inflatables. That'll be a lot of fun for them to play with. Sign the insurance waiver before. No, I'm just kidding. And also on the way out, there are a few bucket hats remaining from summer vacation. I know all of you are equally valuable, but not all of you will get one. So fight for your bucket hat, okay? We'll see you guys next week. Thanks for being here.